Hey, it's Ethan with Zimmer Labs, here to do a quick video on this MK1 Teensysaber Neopixel I just built. It is Roman's MK1, a weathered edition. I built this for Kevin, so Kevin, I hope you approve. I hope you enjoy. It is a fully loaded masterpiece level saber. The hilt is by Roman's. He does a terrific job with these. The design is fantastic. The whole thing is extremely heavy and sturdy. And we have a Rudy Pando crystal chamber here in the middle with a Shtok Custom Works gold or brass internal crystal chamber, and then proplicator fins on the back. Kevin wanted this to be weathered and used looking. He didn't want it to be shiny and brand new looking, so that's why you see the chamber elements not as polished as I usually prefer to make them. But one thing I did want to show you guys that's a bit not necessarily out of the ordinary, but just stands out with this one is the crystal that I found to put in this guy is just enormous. It takes up literally the entire crystal chamber area. The two brass elements that are in there that hold the crystal are designed to be able to be located basically wherever you want for convenience, so you can slide them in or out depending on the crystal you have. This crystal is so big that you almost don't even see the brass elements. I mean, obviously they're visible and they're awesome, but there's 3/4 of an inch of more of those brass fixtures that are inside the actual hilt itself on both sides because this crystal is so massive. But I thought it looked absolutely terrific and it really fit perfectly. It's illuminated with twin Neopixels and is set up and programmed to mimic the blade. Next up we have a nice weathered blade plug, also by Shtok. This was part of a MK1 blade plug run that he did about a year ago. I happened to be lucky enough to pick up a few of them at the time, and this is the first time I've actually had a chance to use one of them. But I'll show you guys how it looks. It's similar to the blade plug that Roman includes, but a little more detailed. So back here, when you pop that cover off, you have access to your the portion of the chassis where the inputs and such are. So you've got your main kill switch here. Now it's live. We've got your SD card here, USB here, and recharge port there. So all easy access to everything. On this guy, the activation and auxiliary buttons are underneath the bubble strip. Activation is here. Auxiliary is here. And there's the shine through on the blade plug. It's really nice. It's kind of classy looking. It's a very, very thin circular section around the edge of the blade plug that illuminates, but it looks really nice and it's very visible. Incredibly visible even though it's thin. Pop the crystal chamber open again for you guys. So you lift the latch and then twist clockwise and pull it open. It's a bit tight. As you open and close it a few times, it will loosen up, but when it's brand new, it remains pretty tight. As you can see, the crystal is really nicely illuminated, but massive. It takes up the entire chamber, which is really cool. Really impressive in green. The whole thing just really glows. set up the blade, and I will run through the different blade presets with you guys. To take out the blade plug, it is a 1.2 millimeter hex or star wrench on the side here. It's a very, very, very tiny little screw, as you can see. That may be one of the very few things that I'm not really big on as far as this hilt goes. I think Roman probably would have been better installing a bit bigger of a retention screw, but I think the idea here was to make it as unnoticeable as possible. So he went with a very tiny one, and it works. Don't get me wrong, it works. But it's a lot easier to wear the screw out, to strip the screw out, and need to deal with replacing it than it is with a much bigger screw. So while it does hold a blade and a blade plug in place, I think a bit bigger would have been better. But, you know, that's fine. You can always just do that yourself. So here's the blade plug. The poly tube here. Nothing going on behind it. And just a simple flat section with some relief to it. The illumination that you guys saw was thanks to the new Neopixel blade connector from Shtok again. Dimitri's got a lot of stuff in this build, I'm noticing. But that's because his products are pretty awesome. This is the new pogo pin connector with 5 3535 Neopixels mounted directly to it. Nice and bright. And they're great because you don't have to worry about putting electronics in your blade plugs anymore, so you can just swap them on the fly or whatever. Or what's great about this connector with this saber is that you've only got this much room to work with, so putting Neopixels and a blade connector into that and making that fit into here is not impossible, but darn close. I mean, it's so tight that I've never actually managed it, and I've spent some time trying. I definitely will admit that. So these are a godsend with respect to these thin neck, short emitter sabers. They're great for this application. Blade is a 1-inch Neopixel blade, and it's got a very non-standard setup going on because of the way this hilt is designed. It's got a internal section here where the blade has to go into between this internal wall and the outside of the emitter wall, so you can't have anything obstructing it, which is why you see the blade connector here is actually inset and not touching the blade itself. And the reason why is because when Roman built this hilt and designed this hilt, he had intended it to be for a Luxion style lightsaber, so that your main LED tri-cree or a quad-cree or something like that would actually be mounted in this metal section, which is designed to be a heatsink. But for Neopixel sabers, it just becomes an annoyance rather than a useful part. But that being said, it's not the end of the world to design a blade to, you know, mount correctly to this. This blade can go in obviously in any orientation, but I found that if you line this part up with this part with the set screw, it goes in the easiest because it's a really tight fit. So that's why you see a little tiny blue mark here. Just line that up with the set screw and it slides right in. No real pressure required. And that is not the case if you are trying to put it in another orientation. It does take a bit of pressure. So I wanted to let Kevin know that that was really the sweet spot, so to speak. Let's fire it up. It's your first blade. It's got sigil sound font, which is one of my favorites. It's a nice bright blue. Second blade is a washed out blue. Third blade is a slightly less washed out blue. This is one of my favorites. It's like a really, really light aqua almost. It's got an Anakin sound font on it. Fourth blade is also blue, but on the cyan side. And I believe that this is Mace Windu sound font. I could be wrong on that though. fifth blade is purple. And all these sound fonts are smooth swing. Next up, green with a Return of the Jedi font. It's called Sentinel. Next up, we've got a yellow blade with a white tip. A corn horn sound font, nice slow ignition retraction. It's one of my favorites. Nice bright red with swarm sound font. Fireblade. Next up is a blue Fireblade. And then one of my new favorites. This is a coral Fireblade. It's a really cool color in person. I don't know if you guys can really tell, but I got this from mixing a couple really funky colors. I think it was honeydew and coral maybe, but it's a really, just really cool color. Kind of like color you'd see in a sunset turned into a fire effect. The blue Tron blade. Strobe blade. Electricity blade. Blue Jedi Seizure blade. This is the blade that's got RGB going on in it all the time, so when you move it, you get all the colors. It really looks excellent in person. Rainbow blade. It's the POV blade. And then lastly, your battery indicator blade. Back to the beginning. Let's pop open the crystal chamber here. Pretty massive, pretty excellent crystal in this guy. I'll show you guys how the internals are set up. To access them, you could pop the cap off here, but if you want to see the remainder of the internals, you take off the whole pommel end, not just the pommel piece, but the second piece as well. The other grenade section, so to speak. Slide that off, and now you've got your access to your entire chassis. This is also a Dimitri Shtok Custom Works part from Shapeways, done in black plastic. Here you see the battery protection circuit hiding right on the side. Sound card here. Your main wire channel runs up and in here. The speaker's located right in the center section. And then your battery hides... Nope, I lied. The battery's right here, and then the crystal chamber is hiding up in here. The buttons are modular, which means you pop the clamp section and you get access to activation and auxiliary button. There's two little springs you want to be careful not to lose if you do take this off. And then these guys, it's a very tight fit, but need a little help from Tool here. Like I said, very tight fit. Really sharp tweezers. And these guys pop right out, and they are on header pins, which connect up to those female pin headers inside, right there. So this guy pops off and goes right back in there, which means that this whole saber is very modular, very easy to disassemble. Once you've got it to this stage, you simply unscrew these two side transistors, and then the clamp slides off, and you can unscrew this section here and access the internals of the crystal chamber, and you basically can break this entire saber down to its component pieces in about a minute or so, which is pretty cool for purposes of upgrading or repairing. Let's put it back together real quick here for you guys. Pop this cap back on the end. Now the tricky part, getting this switch mechanism back in there without mangling these pins. You just want to make sure that they're lined up perfectly, and then just push it in with some decent amount of force. But if they're not lined up when you push it in, bye-bye pins. There we go. She's back in place, and we lost a spring. So again, we have to be real careful not to lose these guys. This one popped off, but they just go back in place. They sit on two little plastic pegs that are right there, so you just push them back in if they come out, and then you slide the bubble strip back into the groove, lock it down, and you're done. And that, as they say, is about it. Kevin, I'm going to include a little hex key for you, which is the appropriate size for this, as well as a display stand and a battery charger, of course. But that is... Oh, one other thing to point out. Because the speaker is located inside the Graflex clamp, you have to be sure to create some venting so that the sound can actually come out. Otherwise it gets really baffled and is not the loudest saber in the world. So what I like to do is clean out and remove some material on one of the edges on the inside here, so that this vent, this oval section here is a massive sound vent. So you get a lot of sound coming out of there, a little bit out of these two holes as well, but the main sound vent is here. And that's a huge difference. Just cleaning that part out and removing that material makes a huge difference. The last thing to mention is that there's no D-ring on this, no belt clip. That's just because I don't bother to put it on until the very last thing, because having that banging around causes scratches and it's just annoying. So I will put that on right before I send it out, and unless you don't want it, in which case I'll just leave it off. But that's that. And then the other option is, if you don't want to have a D-ring for a belt clip, you can do a CoverTech knob right here, and there is even a little tiny screw hole that comes already pre-drilled into the hilt, which I am guessing is intended for a CoverTech wheel, but it's just a guess. But it's very easy to put one on. And that, guys, is about it. Thank you for watching, and more to come.